Gail, are you calling the meeting to order then?
You call the meeting to order and I will take roll.
Oh, that's right. We do not have Gina here. So, all right, we're calling the community or the CCB meeting. Actually, I'm combining my meetings here. Calling the CCB meeting to order at OPRF for January 12th, 2022. Gail, could we please have the roll?
Yes. Mr. Davis is going to be joining us later. Mr. Coughlin.
Here.
Mr. Chandler.
Here.
Zoe. Miss Kraft. Miss Grimes.
Here.
Dr. Hardy.
Here.
Mr. Henry.
Here.
Mr. Miss Jaber. Here. Mr. Dr. Gregory
Hi, I'm here.
Johnson. Miss McQueen.
Here.
Dr. Morrison.
Here.
Caspian Murray. Mr. Poe.
I'm here.
Miss Sakamiya.
I'm here.
Thank you. Miss Smithson.
Here.
I don't believe Dr. Starks Turner is here. Miss Steffens.
Here.
Miss Parker.
Here.
And Randy Bean. Thank you.
Okay, so Gina sends her regrets. Unfortunately, she's not able to be here tonight. And so partially because we have work to do as we go into second semester, but also heightened by the fact that we didn't have a meeting in December. We wanted to make sure we pressed on and kind of followed up on our last meeting and took a few steps towards kind of leaning towards what the rest of this semester is going to be. So the agenda today is going to do really three things. So we're going to do a little bit of a circle conversation like we always do. We're then going to begin a conversation that first kind of refreshes our memories of what the November CCB meeting was like and talk a little bit about what the themes were from the feedback we got from our breakaway groups. Dr. Hardy is going to share a document and well, we'll have that shared up and we'll talk about that with all of us a little bit and gather some feedback there. We will then begin to talk a little bit about, within the context of that work, some of the ways that we're gathering student voice in the school, just to kind of throw those out there so we have that context to feed our conversation moving forward. And then we want to move towards a charge that this committee has kind of unique to this year with board goals that were passed, later than, our first few meetings, and specifically a board goal related to the culture and climate of the district and at OPRF. And Linda's going to share some information, Principal Parker, to help feed that conversation as well. So that's the overall frame for the meeting. And we asked Dr. Chandler, in Gina's absence, to take over circle facilitator role. So Dr. Chandler, the floor
I'm
is
sorry,
yours.
could I interrupt for a moment? Could we have a approval of the minutes?
Oh, approval of the minutes. Yes, could we have somebody, do you need a motion to approve the minutes?
Please do.
All right, move to approve the minutes to the November CCB meeting. Do I have a second?
So moved.
I'm sorry, who was that, please?
Hardy.
Thank you.
Seconded by Parker.
Thank you. And that's a voice vote?
Dr. Johnson, you have a motion and a second. You want to go ahead and call your vote.
So do I just around the horn, call people by name? Or
No,
we just said everybody in favor?
Correct.
Everybody in favor, please say aye or give thumbs up.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Anybody against? All right, so there we go. Now, our agenda, the three things we talked about. Let's turn this over to Dr. Sandra if we could. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Greg, and Happy New Year, everyone.
New Year.
I hope your 2022 is off to a good start. It's good to see folks. And for Circle, I thought we could take a moment just to reflect on last semester. It's been a while since we've been together, but as we head into the second semester and reflecting on what we've covered so far, let's go around and I want to just share with the group, what would you like to see more of this group doing and discussing for this semester? And so if you recall, we usually just kind of start and then, say your piece, try to keep it to 30 seconds and just pass the mic to your neighbor. So I'm going to pass to Melanie to kick us off.
Happy New Year, everybody. I'm so excited to see you guys. I was really hoping that we would be in person, but maybe in a couple of months. So to answer the question of what I'm hoping to see CCB do or changes I would like to see, because of the COVID situation and the kids are sometimes they're in the school, sometimes they're out of the school. District 97 is now out for the next 2 days. Time is like really precious. And so if we could be a bit more concise and laser focused on what we look to accomplish, whatever that action item is. And then that way, after we have Circle and everyone has, said their piece of answering that question, we can dive right into what the action is. Was it done? Was it not done? What do we need to do to get it done? So by the next time we meet, we have something accomplished. We have something crossed off our list, or we have reviewed the data showing that what we want to work is working or it's not working. And then we need to have a different conversation on how to pivot to make things work. And then that way, I don't feel like, I got to get some studying done, or you know what I'm saying? So I just really want these to be more robust and purposeful instead of, I feel like we're spending time with each other. And I appreciate it, but I really want to say we've gotten a lot done in the midst of not being able to meet in person.
And please pass it to someone.
To my right, Mr. Coughlin.
Hi, I'd like to see more student voice on the committee moving forward. And I will pass it to Susan Stevens.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here with everybody. And I'm with Mr. Coughlin about the student voice. I'm really glad that when we were meeting last time, that we really worked that or talked about that and hope to see it move forward. It's critical.
You know who you're passing it to?
Yes, thanks. Who's next? Mr. Poe, Patrick?
I'm kind of in line with what everybody else said. Seeing the results of what we said we were going to do, progress made thereof, and then having more youth involvement, youth voice. I will pass it to Ms. Jaber.
Thank you. I think for me personally, I'm new to CCB this year, and so I think more connection or direct impact of like how CCB directly impacts the school. So I'm still kind of building that connection. I'll pass it to Janelle.
Hi, everyone. I echo what I hear everyone saying, being concise, student voice for sure, and finding a way to impact actual change, I think, instead of just having the conversations that we get to have in this space, but finding a way to make this work relevant in the life of our community. And I'll pass it to Dr. Hardy.
Thank you, Janelle. Hey, everybody. Happy New Year. Probably echoing in some way what was already said. I'd like to see us be very articulate about our initiatives and in each of our conversations, reviewing whether it's data or updates, being very specific and articulate about how those initiatives of this committee, whatever we've selected, how they're going, and our updates on those. I will pass it to board member Henry.
Thanks, Doc. Pretty much echo what everybody said already, particularly what Melanie stated. I like to think just quantifiable, measurable goals that we're going to achieve. And I think just in a way, ensuring that they can coincide with initiatives we're doing at the board level already, board administration is doing. We're supposed to be an advisory committee, so I'd like for us to kind of focus on initiatives that perhaps the administration and board is considering or working on to make improvements. And we can be that filter or just provide suggestions in a more concise manner. And I think doing that, we could, I love circle time, but I think if we can just be very cognizant of the time we're spending and spend a little bit more time on the initiatives and the things we're talking about. So if we can just put a timer maybe, I'm sorry, I'm a project manager. If we could do a timer on like circle time, ensure that we get to the actual action items, that'd be great. But yes, looking forward to make sure we keep having change move forward. A data dashboard, I'm gonna say that was something we can actually say we accomplished, and that was big. So things like that. And I'll pass it to, I guess, Greg, is that you? Did I pass it to you? Did you go already?
I have not gone, so that's great.
Okay, I'll pass it to you.
I'm not going to reiterate in the interest of a common theme that has emerged here to be efficient and clear and direct with where we're going, but I am going to add one piece. I think that when we talk about the culture and climate of the school, we, I think, should address the fact and always keep in our mind's eye in some way the fact that the adults in the building help to set that culture and climate of the school. And so when we think about culture and climate, the work we do with those we work side by side with on a daily basis, our teachers, our colleagues, those spaces, that is part of the culture and climate. And the students respond to that in a lot of ways. So I want to make sure that as we move forward and we do the work that's already been described, we think about that. We think about how we're pulling in those conversations and those voices into the fold. So I can talk a lot more about that, but I'm not. And I'm going to pass it to Dr. Morrison. I believe you are up.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Happy New Year, everybody. Wishing everybody well for this year. Really echoing much of what's already been said, but I think in recent conversations that we've had, I've been really excited by this idea of really identifying some shared goals across the building. So having specific culture and climate topics that the entire building is working on, and very visible, very tangible, depending upon your particular role at the building. But and then, of course, really wanting to see more student voice and input here. Thank you. And I'll pass it to Laura.
Hi, everybody. I am solo parenting, and it's a little bunkers here, so that's why I have my camera off. But I agree with everything that has been said. I would really love some very specific goals that we're working towards and tasks that we can complete towards that to make sure that we're really effective in what we've been charged to do. Oh, and is there any, I'm sorry, I'm on my own. I can't tell if there's anybody who hasn't gone yet.
We have two, I think.
Karen, did you go? Karen Grimes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, of course, I agree with everything that's said. And what it brings to mind is other kinds of community-based kind of committees I'm on that meet once a month, and then you end the meeting and you don't really have action steps that you're going to do, and the next month goes along and there's been a month past and there weren't really actions that were taking place in between. Now, as an advisory committee, I don't know if there's a lot of actions that take place in between, but to leave with some kind of direction that we then come back with feedback, seems like a good idea to me, in addition to everything else that's been said. Who else was the other one?
The last one, Karen, I think. Linda.
Oh.
And again, echoing everything that was said, and I'm so glad that it was pretty much a common theme throughout. My biggest concern is to make sure that we have a representation of all of our diverse population within the school as we're trying to advise the culture of the school. And so I do think that the increase of student voice and staff voice is going to be very important for that conversation, since they live that every day. But then also finding a way to make sure we're representing the whole and not fractured pieces of the community of the school.
And we actually have two other people who need to chime in.
Okay.
Yeah, Cal Davis.
Oh, they just came in.
Yep, and we need to get Lincoln's perspective as well, so.
Yep. So throw it to Mr. Davis, since Mr. Chandler is the host of this.
What's the question? I just got here from
sure, Calvin, the question,
meeting.
the question is, so reflecting on last semester, what would you like to see more of this semester?
Oh, that's easy. Completion. I want us to complete an initiative, and I want the youth to see complete an initiative and watch us go forward into their freshman.
Thanks, Calvin. And I apologize for being off camera, but my bandwidth is limited. I would want to see more student engagement this year. We've done better in past years. I know there's a lot going on, but I want to make sure we kind of build on the conversation that we started, and just making sure that student voice is throughout, and that we are kind of getting some clear to-dos coming out of the meetings. So thank you all for your time, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks everybody. I realize also, as a mea culpa here, I have done a very poor job moving through what is a very simple agenda. I skipped over the minutes, or the minutes, yes, but also visitor comments. Gail, did we have any? And did we lose Gail before I say that? I think I lost Gail. So we're going to say that as we didn't. And let's then go on to the next.
And Melanie.
Oh, Melanie, did you want to share something?
I wanted it to be on record for us to go back as an action item on how to get more student engagement. I know I've brought up a couple of times making this a silk, giving students credit to be a part of it. Freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, because we want them over the years, not just, when they're upperclassmen. So I just wanted to go on record with that. We need to be intentional in making sure that they're here and they feel comfortable talking.
Well, that's great. And I could not have asked you to do a better job transitioning into the next topic that we have. We don't want to lose sight of the conversation that we had before, in our November meeting, and those ideas that were shared. And we also want to make sure that we tie that to specific goals that our board and we have for what we want to be doing as a school. And so we want to talk about both of those things. I want to speak, though, a little bit about Karen's comments earlier about the importance of making sure that there are action items, like we know what our steps are moving forward. I think it was Kabrib who talked about this really as an advisory committee moving forward. And what we really see this as is a monthly group that meets where we kind of get feedback on those key initiatives that we have to help shape their focus, shape how they're implemented. And then we do the work behind, we do the work. And then we come back in and we say, okay, look, here's what's happened. and here's where we are. And sometimes you'll see steps, and sometimes you'll see, look, we've been struggling a little bit here. So you're going to see a little bit of that today. Dr. Hardy's going to talk about how we spent some time theming out the feedback that we got, including that which Melanie was just sharing. And then we'll talk about the work we're going to do to give us really clear direction and get feedback on that. So thanks for that. And Dr. Hardy, are you able to share your screen, or should we find some other way to get that shared? Go ahead if you could. And Francis, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. There we go. Okay. All right, Dr. Hardy, the floor is yours if you don't mind. Just one moment.
Sorry about that. It just a little technical problem there. Wouldn't let me unmute, and I'd need to be able to talk. In our last meeting, Greg, you're the only one I can see. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can absolutely hear you. All good.
All right, cool. Thank you. In our last meeting, you may recall we split off into small groups and we tackled a couple of questions. How can we increase student voice? How can we increase teacher voice? And for the life of me right now, I'm not remembering the third question. The most important one for this discussion, though, is the student voice piece. And you heard that a couple of times in the circle, which I think everyone's going to appreciate, keeps coming up. This is a very simple approach to understanding what it is we were looking for. I am going to see if I can. I'm just hoping that this is big enough. It's big enough on my screen. I'm always worried how it looks on other people's screens. So there were 4 categories into which we thought we could fit your comments. The first category or theme that emerged from those conversations, and these are basically using your words, the group's words, and then the items below say where we took that language from the comments from the different groups, pretty much verbatim. So the first theme was ensure that students can share their input, values, and opinions by increasing the number of student participants, asking participants to seek feedback from their peers who they may be representing, of course, and then centering students' voices at the start of each meeting. Each group made some sort of statement about that. In that particular category, there were a total of 9 statements. In the second category, the groups thought maybe we can center student voice by allowing them, students, to have input into the agenda and providing them with the questions that they may have to consider in advance. The group's comments are here in this column, and there were a total of 6 in that section. The third theme that emerged was increase opportunities to value the perspectives and beliefs of students by shortening the agenda and starting the meetings earlier. And as you can see, there were a couple of comments in that category and in that theme. The last column that you see on the screen is also pretty straightforward. These didn't fit with anything else. They're kind of standalone. They didn't fit in the 3 themes that started to emerge, but they didn't start forming another theme either. I just want to spend just a few final seconds there. One, maybe offer a service credit. The second one was inform students about CCB. They may not even be aware, meaning the school body, the student body, broader student body. They may not even be aware that the committee exists or what it does if we're looking for their voices and their involvement. Allow students to lead subcommittees in order to gather student voice, and communicate expectations for participation in advance, which is a little different than the restructuring of the meeting itself by providing participants with the questions in advance. This was communicating expectations for participation in advance, and then finally make the topics school-wide topics. can they be made competitive? And so, as you can see, for some reason, the number is disappearing, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'll type that in because it's there. There were 5 standalone topics, and then you see the totals. With this first one having received the most items collected from all the 3 groups. And I just want to go back up and show you what that one was, and I'll leave the screen there. Greg, I don't know if you want me to stop sharing after I'm done or just leave it there so people can see it, or I might think of some other strategy for that once I get a moment to think right in the moment. Again, the one with the most items was, the theme with the most items was ensure students can share their input, their values, their opinions by increasing the number of participants, asking participants to seek feedback from their peers before they come to a meeting, and centering student voices at the start of each meeting. Those were 3 things we thought we could do together to increase student voice. That's my summary, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think what we should probably do right now is just open it up for people's response to that, whether this kind of captures the conversation and get some thinking on that point. And I'll remind everybody too that as you log into to Board Docs and you're taking a look at what's in there, you'll have access to this. So everybody has this.
And that I was, because I can't put it in the chat
right,
because of the type of meeting. So, but yeah, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, no problem at all. Any responses to that? Yeah, let's just open it up.
I would like to go. I was taking some other notes. I wanted to ask first, is there student representation on the school board?
So right now, there is not student representation on the board, except for the fact that there's a representative from student council who comes to the regular board meeting each month and shares out kind of what's going on for the student body. We have other ways that we are bringing student voice into that space by the way of kind of sharing out some of the most impressive achievements that are happening both in our activities and clubs and in our sports teams. But sitting at the board table, which was really, I think, the pinpoint of your question, we don't have that. There's been conversation at the board table about that. I believe it was, I could be wrong about this, Kabreeb, you could jog my memory. I believe it was a committee of the whole meeting perhaps in December where we talked about it. And what we are doing is there was talk about, is this the right place? I mean, it mirrored in some ways the conversation we had here at this group back in November. We talked about, is CCB really designed to be a student committee? Should we have other committees that were, is the board really a place where we want students in on? And I think the board had, and we all had kind of a variety of opinions on that. One action step that we decided on as a result of that conversation was that a new committee, which I wanted to address and speak about a little bit today, is the place where that conversation is going next about having a student at the board table. And that is the Superintendent Student Advisory Committee. Dr. Linda Parker and I are co-leading. There are 2 board members who are on that Superintendent Student Advisory Committee. There are 2 board members, and the purpose of that committee is to gather feedback from students about what's going on in the school, and also to share out critical board topics that we would benefit from student feedback on. And the first board topic that we want student feedback on at the first meeting that we're going to be having in January, it's set for the last week of January, is your question exactly, Melanie. Should we have a student rep from perhaps the SSAC, that committee, on the board and at the board table? So that's critical. And I'm going to say one last thing about that committee, just because it's linked to the question that you asked. It's a 40 student member committee, 10 from each grade level. It's representative demographically of our population. It mirrors the demographics of our overall student population. In order for students to be on it, they had to submit. We encouraged students who had come out to us expressing a desire for such a thing, and we opened it up to the entire student body to submit their interest in being on it. And we had actually 87 students who wanted to be on it, and we had 40. So it's really nice. Yeah, it's cool to see that level. So anyway, the answer to your question now really quickly is Yes, that's a conversation the board has had. It hasn't happened yet. It's going to go to that SSA first for a little bit of feedback from the students themselves. And then that feedback will advise the board's conversations moving forward. Kabreev, if I missed anything, jump in and let us all know, because you were sitting at the table too. So.
No, you pretty much summarized it. And there were a variety of opinions of how, I'll just give you mine real quick. One concern I did have was, would we have a student on the board, just to have a student on the board, right? Would that be effective? Would they feel intimidated? So I think the committee that Johnson's referring to, I thought it was a good step. But last thing I want to have a student on the board that feels intimidated, can't really speak up, because if I remember the meeting correctly, there was a presentation that my student, I think, for environmental, a green initiative, right? And he actually gave a pretty good presentation. Then we all had different critical thoughts about it, and could be perceived as being negative, but it was just more critical and pragmatic. And he didn't speak anymore after that. So when you have all these adults in the room that are speaking, what do you feel like you can use your voice and actually talk? So perhaps there might be a better avenue for these kids to feel free and feel like a safe space to talk without feeling judged or intimidated. Some students won't care, but that's just not a common thing for teenagers. But that was just my concern during that meeting, Greg.
So I want to mention my opinion and why I think it is monumentally important. These are the formative years where students do have a voice. And not too long ago, our kids had another protest. So obviously we have some kids that are not afraid to speak out about how they're feeling. My concern is that they're only doing it when they're angry and they're not feeling like they have an outlet to actually have a sit down conversation with those that are in charge, because they may not be listened to. And so the go-to is, we're going to protest to get what we want. And the track record is that's what's working. And what should be working is intelligent conversation, give and take, understanding both sides. So it also in saying that we have students that do not speak well. And this is a great opportunity for them to build that. For me, it's in my church. My children have been speaking since they had to do Easter speeches. That's not for everyone. But at some point, if we're preparing them for college, they have to learn how to do public speaking at some point, and it should be a safe space. We have business majors. We have students that are already at Triton. Why wouldn't they have an opportunity to do a presentation or speak about their experience? And anytime, and we all know this, if you're talking about a Black person and that involves me, I need to be in that room. And if we're talking about students, first of all, they have to know what we're about. They absolutely should have a table if ever there's being a decision being made about them. For example, my daughter came home about the changes coming back since COVID, and she thought some things were dumb. Kids aren't putting their mask on. Why haven't we had access to the second lunchroom anyway? Why can't we go out anyway? Those things made sense to her, but who would she share that with when the decision has already been made? And when students are there to get their feedback on, well, how do you think we should handle lunch so that we can bring down the spread of COVID? Or why aren't you guys wearing your mask? Or what is making you angry that you prefer to have a walkout versus Dr. Greg, can we have a conversation? Like, why aren't our kids feeling comfortable enough to do that? And so that's why they should be in every single room possible.
Right. So that's why I like Minister. My point I was saying about the board meeting. My also concern was we have a very diverse population of kids there. So if it's one or if it's two kids, are they going to get everyone's aspect or voice of it, right? So the committee Greg's referring to, I liked because I looked at the makeup, and I think it's about half white and the rest is Black, Latinx, and Asian, which is a great, I guess, balance of the school is. You're going to get a lot of intentionality from those kids in that meeting if it's once a month. If it's at a board level, you have one student say it's a white kid or a different white kid, where you get everyone's input. And I don't want a kid to feel intimidated at the board level. They can come, not saying don't come, but I think the best way to get their actual feedback, like your daughter was saying, if say you have 30, I think it's 20 kids, if I'm not mistaken, for that committee, Greg, 40, 30?
It's 40, it's 10 at each
40.
grade level, so 40.
Okay, 40. Of those 40 kids, I mean, you have a great breadth of like people you can get feedback on. And I think that I like to see how that plays out. I just think you're gonna get probably more bang for your buck in that meeting, as opposed to a kid that might come to the board meeting. They can be there for any reason. I want the input to be what's important, what like Melanie's talking about in Superintendent Advisory Committee.
Yeah, I want to say one thing too that Linda, then I'll turn over just for real quick, but I think another comment that came out at the board table that I recall about having a student at the board is that, it could potentially be valuable for that individual kid, but if we don't have a structure for that student who's at that board table to communicate meaningfully with the student body at large, it really is an isolated piece that works really for a pretty decent looking resume builder for that kid, which is not a bad thing. That's a cool thing for that kid, but it's not serving the purpose that really is driving this conversation and what we want to be discussing at CCB. So that's why we wanted to use this committee as kind of the initial ground to have that conversation and see where it goes. And also maybe it could be the reciprocal point of communication between the board and the student group. There was a point made earlier too about wanting to have action steps. The first, Linda and I met today, and we were talking about how we are going to kind of structure that first meeting. And there were calls in the conversation earlier today about making sure there are clear action steps. We are going to assign every student on the committee when we meet later this month. They have to watch and take notes at a board meeting. They have to, and they're recorded. So you don't talk to me about time. They're recorded. You can go take a look at this, anything you want. And then when you're going to come back at the next meeting, we're going to talk about your takeaways from that board meeting. That'll help to get a real feel for what students can kind of how they're able to access, what's going on at a board meeting. So excited about that. Principal Parker, Ed.
I was just going to mention to Ms. McQueen as well, just the importance of what she said in giving the students a voice with someone within the building. I've tried to do that this year by making sure that kids didn't have to come to me, but that I went into their space. And so once a week during their lunch periods, I'm always in the Student Activity Center to actually take some of those ideas, take some of that concern. And students have increasingly come to see me as they know I'm just there and they can't believe I'm sitting there. So it's pretty amazing to them to come in and actually talk and handle things depending on what they're asking for on the spot there. I do know that some of our students go out for lunch, and so they may be out of the building and not able to stop by, but I do try to make sure they know that they can speak to me and have kind of broken down the wall and the veil of like how you get to that person, because I do want them to know you don't have to wait till you're upset to actually have someone listening to you and taking account of your concerns. And that has seemed to make some headway this year. So point taken.
So thanks. That was a lot of talk about the first feedback, right? Was what are we doing with board kind of engagement? Is there any other feedback from the themes that Dr. Hardy was sharing out earlier? Okay, then I think what we would be a good idea is to take a look at some of the goals that we have begun, that we are crafting to hold ourselves accountable as an organization around this question of student engagement and how to get the culture and climate to where we really want it to be. And so, Ms. Parker, if you could share your screen and kind of take us through the way that you have begun to kind of form your way of holding yourself and our school accountable for this work. So.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. So as you heard even in the call, there have been some changes since coming back into our semester. And some of the changes that have happened were formed through actually most of them through a committee that I work with within the school of teachers and staff but then I've also integrated student voice from students who have come to talk to me and run ideas past them when they do come to me when I'm sitting downstairs in the Student Activity Center, to just try to figure out how to make sure we're addressing some of the concerns that we see from both the student and the staff side of the building. So for those of you who are parents, you may remember that I sent out letters just in regards to some of the behaviors that we were seeing earlier in the year. And some of the responses from parents were like, well, we need the school to do something about that. And so some of these goals were shaped from that as well. And then students are now experiencing some of that. So you may also have heard of some things that are happening in the building as a result of that. And so when we look at the goals, there were 3 areas of concern that we were addressing. The first being of climate, the second being of responsive supports for students, and then the third being restorative discipline. If I start with climate, our goal in our climate was actually to make sure that we were working with students and our staff on exactly a universal set of expectations within the buildings, kind of like what it means to be a Husky. So if you've heard about Pack Pride, we're trying to not just wear the orange and blue, but be the orange and blue, like what it really means to be Tigerista, those things that are best. And so we were looking to set our expectations, because oftentimes with students, we just expect them to know, but no one has actually expressed those expectations. We kind of spelled that out and built that within our culture starting second semester, so that students knew exactly what our expectations were. And we're working to use that as a universal language throughout the building to make sure that they understand what our expectations are and of each other. So peer-to-peer as well as adult to student as well. And we are definitely trying to address some of our racial disparities in discipline through this, because we have some misperceptions, impact versus intent issues that happen in our building that we really want to take a look at, so that we can get past I didn't know that, or I wasn't sure that that had happened, and actually working towards seeing all students treated in a way that it's a mutual set of respect and understanding for what's going on. And we are, and some of you may have received already, in the midst of the 5 Essential Survey that comes out every year. We're trying to build up our student teacher trust to see that this may have made an impact. I can hear it in the hallways and hear it when individuals are speaking, but I am looking to see that students are able to actually respond on a survey to speak to the student teacher trust that they feel as a result of some of these climate changes. For our restorative responsive supports is really looking at some of our social emotional interventions that we have. This year with our MTSS social emotional behavior team, we started some interventions to actually teach some critical skills for students as identified through a screener that we were using to see if we could make sure, again, that we were teaching the skills that needed to be there, so that students had tools in their tool chest to use in order to see greater success in their academics, as well as in their interactions throughout the building. We are working to adjust some of those in the second semester, as well as adding on and looking at a way to do a universal screener throughout our entire building to make sure we're identifying all of the students that we need to through this, the screener that we're using. We are again going to, we've been progress monitoring this with our data from our EWS, as well as some of our culture and social emotional learning surveys that we've been using. The 5 Essentials, again, will pick up with this, and Panorama Education is actually the screening tool that we're using with our students to actually seek out and properly place students where they need to be, again, to build the skills that we see are necessary. So we're responding to the needs that they are demonstrating through these, the surveys. And then lastly, with the restorative discipline, this has been one that's been on our table as we looked at the BEP, but we're really, really interested in cultivating a safe and inclusive environment for all of our individuals in the building, students, adults, everyone, placing focus on building relationships with individuals. and actually responding to the conflict or issues with more restorative actions instead of punitive actions. And this is definitely to make sure that we are addressing racial disparities in our discipline, which we will be observing as we pull the data for our semester that just passed, as well as our yearly school discipline data. Remembering that this year, because we are fully into our behavior education plan, it's going to be not an apples and apples comparison to past years because we were in our code of conduct last time. But in looking at initial data, there's definitely been some correction because there are more things being handled at a level 1 in the classroom, as opposed to things that used to just get reported out and reported for deans to refer to deans to be disciplined. And so that has been something that we've experienced this year, and also some changes that are going to be suggested to the BEP just to, from what we've learned in implementation of the BEP that we've had to do. So these were 3 specific areas in terms of what we're looking at as a school. And I was very much interested in just tonight even, just knowing if there's been any reports to individuals within there. I was hoping students would be here because I'm also trying to get their feedback as much as possible as to the things we've been doing within the school just this semester to make an impact on these areas of concern. And so I can stop sharing so that we can discuss. That helps.
Ditto to my earlier comment too. You all can have access to that document. It's in Board Docs when you log in there, so you can see that.
Just to everyone's point too, for this committee, when I gathered the committee within our school building that has been working on this, one of the major points that the individuals asked about was this going to be an action-oriented group? We were very interested in not just talking about what the problems are or talking about what could be done, but not trying anything, actually jumping in and trying some things, even if we had to adjust and shift. And so for those of you who are parents, I would love to know what you've been hearing. I get messages from some of my parents in terms of what's happening. And they span the spectrum, which we expected. There are some students and adults who are like, this is just so basic. But you'd be amazed that like the things we consider basic for one are not basic for all. And so we have to be willing to reach out and touch everyone to try to bring them there. And then also take accountability for ourselves and our peers in terms of helping them if it's not basic to individuals. So it's been a great ride and very interesting. And the committee has been very encouraged by the reactions. Just one action thing we did last week, we had individuals go into every advisory and actually talk about what the Pack Pride is and what these Husky habits are about, and do some explaining to the students. I actually am going back to one advisory tomorrow myself because they had more questions, and they asked me if I could come back again and just have that discussion with them. So they had a chance to meet different adults throughout the building, administrators, talking about why this is important and what it really means within the school.
And I also just add in there too that you aren't the only member of that committee in this space right now. You have at least one other member. So, I just want to throw that out there. Sana. So
I know. I didn't want to out you, Sana. I was doing good not to out you, but
thanks.
I didn't.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I can share just a little bit about the committee. Being on both committees is a unique perspective. I would say definitely one of the biggest goals of the committee is to support character building. And, one of the things that I believe is like name it to tame it. So we have to name these things for our students so that we're explicit with them. And especially we acknowledge the pandemic and the impact on their, emotional well-being. And so really the center of the committee is a combination of, faculty and staff, but really trying different things to support students, to getting to class on time, interacting in different spaces, connection between teacher to student. And so it is very action oriented, which is nice because we're just willing to try something and then try it out for a month, get feedback from people, tweak it and move forward. So I'm grateful to be on that committee.
So I just have a couple of questions. The first is in regards to the outreach that is going on to try to connect to the students. And we've asked this question 100 times, so it's not a new question. But I'm still gonna always ask, are we including counselors with this? They're doing the regular check-ins with the students. Are they bringing these opportunities up? Are they also asking about the temperature of how students are feeling with the different COVID restrictions or what's going on at home? Are they dealing with anxiety, different things like that? Are we including the counselor? The second question is back to the protest that happened. Was there a conversation with any of the protesters or who may have, or the students that may have risen as the leaders of the protest to find out, what else could have been done?
I'm trying to also pinpoint which protest, which I'm sorry, because the one that's on my mind is the athletics.
Correct. That's
okay. Okay. I'm sorry. And I
don't want any more.
Right. No, not only that, I almost believe too that it was because that happened over a weekend. There was no other outlet because school was out and it was a weekend. And so I think there was just this, what do we do if there's nobody there to say something to? And it kind of boiled up into a, like we have to march.
Kids plan.
No, I believe it,
Yeah.
but it was a Friday. Like they had to plan like that. Like I get why that happened versus let's go tomorrow and ask them what's going on here. There was no tomorrow because it was Saturday. So I do understand that happened. The question though was, how are we making sure that they have an outlet to do, like to speak to someone before going to that, and then the counselors as well. So I know that the counselors and the social workers speak to the students about this. I do know also that like in their reporting to me, typically students, if you ask them how they're doing, if you're asking them and you're trying to dig deep with them, they're fine. Like they're fine till they're not fine. And then that's when it's all there. What's been reported to me is that there have been more young men who are actually seeing their social worker and having issues that before the pandemic that wasn't being seen. Which was interesting to the social workers in terms of just who was coming in and how it was manifesting in them in terms of their concerns. But they are addressing it. I think and when we think about mental wellness, I think it's important to make sure that students and children like all over know that it's okay to not be okay. Because I think they learn from us that you have to be strong, you have to have your face on, you have to put it, and we don't really tell them like, it's okay if you're not okay right now. So I think in teaching that, they start to get more comfortable with telling you what's really going on. But again, too, the relationship is important. I can see that even amongst the students who come to see me, the more they do, the more like in the hall, it's just like, hey, Miss Parker, like I can see them getting more comfortable and being more willing to share things about that. But that is something I think we could, like, if we think about that in terms of how we'd want to work with students on that, like that you don't have to put on this face that everything's okay. And if somebody asks you, like, what can they do? Or if there's something they can help you with, it's okay to have that conversation and to talk to them about it.
Yeah, I was just thinking more in terms of, how well versed are the counselors in CCB? How well versed are the counselors and the 40 student group, or that the school board would be interested in student representation? That's really where I was going with that, for them to also be that conduit of making sure that they're being touched at every point. And my daughter's always checking in with her counselor. And I would venture to say, they'd say, what is CCB?
Yeah, and I would say to, like, my question back to the group would be, how would you want them to present CCB? Like, what exactly would we want to put out towards them? Because just as we have to educate the students on how we want to build skills for them. That's a skill I would say we have to build in them. If we're telling them that we want them to, you know, talk about this particular group, how would we want this group talked about so that it could be consistent too amongst 15 of them plus 5 social workers? Because I'm always concerned about consistency of the message. So everyone's getting that same word and not another variation of it. So I would be interested in that as a group too, if that was something we wanted to do as an action, like what would you
I was
want me
gonna
to take
say,
back?
I'd like that as an action item,
Mhm.
because just as they're building relationships, they also see things in students and say, you know what, I think you'd be really great for, and now this is another option for them that they didn't know was available.
And to that, let me add this too, because there has been, as I've been doing restorative work within our building, there is often times where there's this delineation of like, that's counseling and social work, and we're teachers. I think it's important that it's understood that that's not necessarily counselor work. Like everyone has the ability to build these relationships and do these things with students. And I think that's important to note, because I think otherwise it gets said as like, that's what counselors do, you know, that they're the ones the kids talk to like that. But I want us all to feel comfortable enough having that conversation. Like oftentimes I have to tell people like that particular thing right there, that's not social work. That's just relationships with students, you know, or relationships with another person. And I think that's important to separate.
You know, as we're talking tonight, I'm thinking about this shared goal of teaching kids the skill of using their voice, of advocating, of making change in their world. We are living in a time where our world needs change, and so it's a critical skill that I think we need to equip our youth with. And so if everybody in the building had that shared goal of teaching that skill, and of course there's different ways to use one's voice. You know, you could come to the CCB, you could, you know, do so many things, but to really teach the adults in the building, these are all the ways in which you can direct a youth to use their voice, or to teach them how to use their voice, whether it be in a class assignment, or, you know, some sort of an advocacy event at the school or a committee. I think that might be an opportunity really to land on a shared goal and really define that for folks in the building.
Let me just pop in too. I mean, all of that, you know, comes to mind of leadership training. All of our kids could use leadership training, and using your voice is part of that. But it all, I think, is something we need to be teaching our kids. And so that language also about developing future leaders is important too.
So I feel like I may be coming from left field, but this question keeps coming up for me, is that it seems, and I'm a community member, my kids have graduated from the high school many years ago. And so that's why I feel like I'm coming in from left field, because I'm not in the school and don't have contact on a daily basis. So, or weekly, just monthly in this setting. So it sounds this new committee of the administrators or superintendent and students and board connection with 40 students, 10 from each grade, is fantastic. And so I'm not clear how that connects with CCB student participation. Is there some kind of formal structural feed from that group into this committee, or this is independent, or how do those work together?
I would love for this group to have that conversation, Susan. I think you've really hit, you really identified a topic that this committee has challenged to really to really sink their teeth into over the past few years. We know we want kids. We know we want student engagement. It's critical, right? And we were, I think we said this last month when we talked about this, we were frankly a little bit spoiled last year because we had some fabulous students on this committee who just came in and bam, engaged like adults, regardless of what the topic was. And so all this whole conversation that we're having right now about growing leaders and teaching that type of engagement was something that we were in a very privileged position last year of simply taking for granted, right? Because that's what so many of these kids brought to us. And so how do we, what really is the role of CCB relative to student engagement? How does CCB work relative to student engagement? Its primary board charge is to get feedback on and help guide the development of our student behavior plan, which is our behavior education work that Linda has talked to. And that really is the bulk of the work that we will engage in as we go into second semester. But in order to do that well, we know we need this level of student engagement. We tried to bring at the beginning of this semester, the reason we had that meeting in November, and I'm sure you recall this, is we had some students coming to this meeting and they came here and they looked at this like, this is for adults and I want to go do something else. And I can't blame them, you know, I mean, I can't blame them in any way, shape or form. So this committee was not originally necessarily designed as a student engagement committee. And we need to think about how it functions to ensure that student engagement about the topics like this are really happening in the school. So all I just really did right there was kind of really say, this is a hard question for me as we think about how this committee works. And I would love to hear this committee's feedback on that point from everyone in the room. I think it's a great question. Thank you, Susan. It's a great question.
Pipe in for a second on that.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so just kind of thinking, actually going back really to the inception, we've had great student participation in just about in every year that I could think of. One thing that I think would help is because we all come to this from wearing different hats, we don't necessarily have all the information, right? So I think historically, this has been a really great place to at least just kind of get us all educated on what is the status quo. So for example, it'd be great to just have a sense of what are the current platforms for student engagement, be they committees, because I feel like we have ideas, but in general, it helps to have that context. Where are we starting from? So to the extent that we can at least just have a sense of what are our platforms for student voice and how do we feel about them? Who's represented, who's not represented? That gives us context. So then when we propose to do something different, we can say, okay, today we're doing this thing this way, but we're proposing to do it a different way. So now we can have a conversation around what's going to be different and then have an expectation of what sort of different outcomes we can expect. And then I think the other thing I would think of is that there's a big chunk of what we've been able to do over the years that has to do with policy change, which is a good thing so long as the policy is implemented with fidelity. So as we're talking about things that we want to change or opportunities to change, I think we also have to have in the conversation, what's the preparation that we're giving, not just to students, but to parents and to everyone in the building or everyone involved to make sure that that change is implemented with fidelity. So I think if we can just bring more context so we can all kind of start to get a common understanding of what the now is, that gives us a better perspective on where we should go from here. And then also, we can just keep in mind what's the fully delivered solution. So not only doing something different, but being consistent in how we do that new thing, whatever it is.
Greg, one thing I'm curious about is I wonder, so like from my personal experience is that like within the building, there's so many outlets for students to kind of voice where they're at. You know, the struggle is how do we get it to this space? And so I'm wondering if you have that committee of 40 students and if like one way to cultivate leadership is like you rotate like every month, 2 people or like 1 freshman, 1 sophomore, 1 junior, 1 senior come and they collaborate together of like you guys give them a topic in advance, or they know the schedule, and they can kind of, when they come as a pack, they're going to be less shy because they've discussed it. They have each other, they're familiar with each other like in another space. So I wonder if you could kind of rotate through them as like a starting point as we continue to brainstorm how to get other students. Does that make sense?
I second that, Sana.
Yeah, it does make sense. I want to make sure though, it makes sense in the idea of getting kids
Yeah.
together. So you represent at different grade levels, collaborating, they come back. Are
Right.
you saying that crew is engaged in CCB specifically? Is that what you're saying? Or is that you specific to the advisory committee that we were talking about?
Well, I'm saying it like if as a committee, we're saying that we really want student voice, using your advisory committee as like a leverage to get more student voice on this committee if this is something we decide as a team.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it does. Yeah.
I think I'm also wondering then too, Greg, what's the impact of that when we think about all the groups asking for possible student voice? Are we then saying that the representatives from the SSAC would then branch out to other, like there's CCB, there's, you know, the different committees that we have, and then they then come back and meet together for us? I mean, like, because if we started here with CCB, then others will say, well, what about our group? You know, are they then the representatives who do that, who circulate kind of like, I think what Cabri was saying, and having voice in different spaces and, you know, throughout the building, or maybe that was Lincoln.
Yeah, I think what I kind of hear is something like treating the students on the SSAC in some ways kind of like board members, right? Where, you know, Cabri knows full well, you all have specific charges as board members and various committees that you're assigned to on an ongoing basis. And the charge really there is to use that, whether explicitly or implicitly, to inform the decisions that you're making and the conversations that you're bringing to the forward board meetings. And this would be the same charge, right? So really make sure that these students are engaged in what's going on in these various places. And when they come back to the SSAC, use, you know, that understanding of these various places to help inform their feedback. Yeah, I think Cabri, is that?
Yeah, it just because as we're talking, it sounds like the scope for these students is getting wider and wider, and more time been taken from them. And having a former graduate that was AP honors, that was in track, that was before, all these different things she was in, sleep was not really her friend. And I was wondering if they're gonna have enough time. I know she was in some kind of leadership class that I believe Greg Noble taught. And perhaps the way we can get some kind of credit for doing this. That way it's just not more work. Because if they're going to be SSAC, then they're going to lay us on to here, the other committees. That's a lot of time. That's for students who already have to have full load from schoolwork and activities and home life.
I think it's definitely something we can discuss with the students coming from all grade levels, because we have 10 freshmen, 10 sophomores. I think the level of engagement for students might be different for all. And so I don't suspect that all of them could do, but it just depends. Out of 40, I don't know what the percentage might be of them. I don't think everybody should have something else to do, for sure.
Right. I mean, so the representatives that you guys had, like those kids are going to be like, I guess the quote unquote, I guess board members unofficially, right? Though I mean that to say yes, I'm going to take on this mantle, you should have some incentive to do so. Otherwise, it's just gonna be one more thing on top of their, on their plate.
Can I add something too? In addition to that, I think when we're talking about giving them the questions that to discuss ahead of time, that in addition to the small cohort that may come to CCB, if it's given enough in advance, they can also shoot it out to the 40-member group to get some feedback too, to have a larger student feedback to bring to CCB if they have enough time. We have a month between meetings that they might have time. How often are they going to be meeting? Once a month also?
Once a month.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a quick question I just don't know if you just happen to know, Linda. I know we do surveys at the school. Is there any way that you do surveys to the 40 kids out of like 3,300 kids? It's just not, you know, it's kind of hard to say these are the representatives, kind of like the state, like the senators and congressmen, right? Doesn't talk to everybody. So it's a way to kind of compile maybe if you have certain questions you're asking that they can then discuss within that SSAC, via feedback from the collective whole of the school. You might only have a 50% response, but that way you at least have more students from different backgrounds and perspectives that you're weighing in, instead of just having 40 kids talking for the whole school. I know it's tough, but just wonder if there's a way we could do that.
And do know too, as Greg mentioned at the start of the when he was talking about it, as we went through to actually select the candidates from the applications, like I am very pleased at how it fell out in terms of diversity and who applied and what's the, I mean, it really was across the board. So everybody from our building is in there. Doesn't necessarily mean they all represent everybody in their groups, right? But one of the things that I've mentioned to students as we've been talking is like, you're like Congress. Your job is to go out and make sure that you're representing the voice of your peers, your group peers, you know, because they don't all run together. So you have to bring back that voice. And that's some of the community agreements that we're talking about as well, the equity of voice, so that it's not just one representation that's happening in that space. So we have to meet with them first as a group to see it, but on paper, I'm pleased by how it fell out in terms of who is on the actual committee.
And every student who applied to be part of this, they had to go through kind of this questionnaire. Tell us about yourself, what are you engaged in? And part of that, in order to get to that questionnaire, they had to go through the requirements, kind of like what we are going to be expecting of you. And one of those requirements is exactly what you're kind of trying to identify there. And it is, you will be asked to go out in sometimes formal ways, sometimes informal ways to gather feedback on things that are going on in the school. Now, what exactly does that mean? We don't know, right? It depends on exactly what the topic is and what the decision is and what the students and we all think we need. But yeah, that's an explicit component of the gig that these kids have signed up for.
Just a question. How do students get reminded or get informed of these meetings? Is there like a email that goes out, or how?
Could you define these meetings as simple as that question?
Like the CCB committee, and like the public comments, right? Like students anybody can submit a comment, correct? Is that?
Yeah, that's right. For somebody who's on the committee, they get the reminders just like anybody else does, and the invites and all that stuff. But your question is bigger and broader and also deeper than that. How are we actually advertising the ways that are already established for kids to get engaged in what's going on on a periodic basis in the school? And, we probably are, as far as getting students engaged in the adult spaces, which is the traditional adult spaces, which is, I think, where your question leads. I think that's something we can ramp up and better define, better figure out. I don't know that we, say to the world, hey, kids, come on, here's the chance for public comment at a board meeting, I don't think we're pushing that out in that way, if that's what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that that's perhaps maybe another opportunity to be much more intentional about putting that out there as a way to get feedback.
And to Miss Melanie's point too earlier, they do organize when they need to. So like I have heard the public comment when they know to come to the spaces when, depending on what it is. I just think it has to be a topic of interest for them. Like they will then, come and make that themselves known. But even for the SSAC, we put that in the student announcements like every day for weeks. And I would still walk up to students and say, well, did you put in an application? What's that? It has to, it's not a thing until it's a thing. And then it's the thing.
Yeah. we have about 8 minutes to go in this meeting, and I'm mindful now of the task kind of that was named at the beginning of the meeting, which is, as we leave this space, what's our charge, right? What's our action step moving forward, and what are we going to bring back to further this conversation next time? Now, on one hand, there'll be feedback from the student voice and kind of what we got at that January meeting, and see how that builds. I really like how Lincoln framed up earlier in the conversation the idea that it would be a good idea to define comprehensively the breadth of the ways that kind of students can get engaged in decision making in the school, kind of, and what is the charge of those spaces. That's valuable. It's valuable just to have that out there. And then I think we need to find a way to really get back into the development or the refinement of specific goals relative to student feedback. And so we're going to find a way to kind of to drive that conversation a little bit more deliberately with this group in future meetings. So yeah, any other feedback for future meetings? Like, what would other folks on the committee like to see for our next CCB meeting as well, given this conversation we've had here? And I think Melanie just raised her hand. Yeah.
Before we get to that question, I just wanted to clarify in regards to the 40 students.
Yeah.
When it was first brought up in my head, I was internalizing, one of the teachers said rotation. And so we only have 4 months left of school. There's 4 grade levels, 10 students each grade. It would be the 2 students that were interested from each grade to come and talk to us. Not there. I don't see how there would be room for, for anyone. Yeah. So whatever 2 wanted to come and see what CCB was about, we have 4 months. We'd have 1 month would be the freshmen, 1 month sophomores, juniors, seniors, or the opposite way, seniors, where we could get their feedback, the juniors, and then down to the freshmen. That was just how I internalized that when I heard the word rotation.
Yeah, I hear. So if we want, maybe we need to spend some time thinking about how we do that, right? Because I realize that we could do that in a way that doesn't quite work for everybody. Any other thoughts on that?
I was actually thinking it would be 2 from each grade for each meeting. Unless that's just too much. Is that overkill? 8 students? I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. 2 students. We only have 4 months. There's only 4 months left of school.
Something like 8 students, from February, March, April, 2 from each grade for each meeting. That way you have 8 total students at each meeting. That way you have all 40 grades represented in. That's what I was thinking, but I'm not gonna say what we have to do. But
yeah, I was just trying to, I just liked rotation. I was trying to understand what that looked like, but I was only thinking 2 students, like only the freshmen would have that night with us exclusively.
Yeah.
But can be talked about later, obviously.
Yeah.
This is Janelle. I think too, if we plan on inviting students in that type of manner, they may not need to stay for the whole meeting if they didn't want to stay for a whole hour and a half. We could prep them with a few questions before and a few prompts before, like bring this, we might ask you this, you might have 20 minutes with us, 30 minutes with us, whatever that looks like. But I think that's a more approachable way for students to attend this. And also, instead of just asking them to attend with a purpose. Because I think sometimes they could just visit us, and like this conversation we had tonight, we all kind of kept talking and saying the same thing, and the goal was to get students here. And so I think if that's ultimately what we end up doing, that needs to be the purpose behind it, with the students to have the idea.
Yeah, that's great. And it's really easy to see how that can happen, right? When we think about the BEP and how kind of the initiatives that we have in place to shape and grow student behavior are playing out. This is what we want feedback, from you all from. We could definitely do that. All right, good. Any other comments or thoughts before we get to our 8 o'clock wrap up point? All right, so thank you all for, and actually, I have to tell you how immeasurably just relieving it is, how relaxing it is to be in a meeting like this and really not spend hardly any time at all talking about COVID. I mean, yeah, this was it almost feels odd. So it's a great thing. Thanks you all for engaging in the conversation. So appreciate it all, and we will we'll piece together what we have here and come back with our next steps. So thanks for the feedback. I appreciate it. And unless there's anything else to share, we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
I move.
Don't be shy. Okay, we have a second?
Second.
All right.
Melanie seconds.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening and stay safe. Okay. Take care.
You guys too. Happy New Year again.
Happy
Happy
New Year.
New Year, everyone.